What on earth is local storage? How do you use it? And more importantly, why would you do so in the first place? This and more is what you'll find out today. Not only will you learn all about local storage, you will also see real-life coding examples that show you how to use local storage in your next development project. First of all, what is local storage? Local storage is like a mini storage space right inside your web browser. It's a handy feature that lets the website store data on your device so they can remember things even if you close the browser and come back a few hours later. It's kind of like having a small cupboard where you can keep important stuff that you can grab anytime. You can think of local storage as a collection of key-value pairs, where each piece of data is associated with a unique name, like a label on a storage box. Websites can store things like user preferences, settings, or even small chunks of information they need to remember. It's pretty nifty because it allows websites to personalize your browser experience, remember your login status, or even let you pick up where you left off in a game or contact forum. Just remember, local storage is specific to each browser and device you use, so your data won't magically appear on a different device. It's like having a personal storage space just for you, right inside your browser. But wait, I hear you say, isn't that what cookies are there for? Well, kind of. Let's talk about that next. So let's talk about the difference between local storage and cookies. In short, they're both ways for websites to store data on your device, but each is a little different. Cookies are like little packets of information that websites can send to your browser, and your browser dutifully saves them for later. Cookies have been around for a long time and are widely used. A couple of things that are unique about cookies. For one, they have an expiration date or time, so they can stick around for a while or disappear after a certain period of time. Cookies are also automatically sent to the server with each request to the same website, giving the server access to the data stored in a cookie. On the other hand, we have local storage. As we said, it's more like a fancy storage space within your browser. Local storage lets the website store large amounts of data compared to cookies. Cookies only store up to 4 kilobytes, while a local storage item can keep up to 5 megabytes. It's like having a bigger shelf where you can keep more stuff. Unlike cookies, local storage doesn't have an expiration date, so the data sticks around until you explicitly clear it, or the website removes it. More on that later. Another difference is how the data is transmitted. As we said, cookies are automatically sent to the server with every request to the same website, kind of like a trusty companion always tagging along. This allows the server to access and modify the cookie data. Local storage, on the other hand, stays put on the client side. It's like a private stash accessible only to client-side scripts running on the same domain. Security-wise, cookies offer an attribute called secure that ensures they're only transmitted over only secure connections like HTTPS. It's like a safety log for sensitive information. Local storage, unfortunately, doesn't have built-in security features, so it's important to be cautious about what kind of data is stored there. In short, don't store your credit card information there, and you wouldn't store that in a cookie either. Cookies are commonly used for tasks like session management, user authentication, and tracking user behavior. They're like reliable buddies that websites can count on. Local storage, on the other hand, is often used for storing user preferences, caching application data, or even temporarily holding data before it's sent to the server. So, cookies and local storage are both ways for websites to store data on your device. They have their own strengths and purposes, whether it's being a trusty companion or a spacious shelf. Knowing about the differences will help you pick whatever suits your situation best. So, what kind of data would you usually store in local storage? Remember, we said no credit card data. Local storage is like a trusty vault where websites can store all sorts of data on your browser. You would usually add information that personalizes the user experience and remembers things about you, such as your choice of language, color theme, and so on. Remember not to put any personal data or sensitive data into local storage. That's like leaving your laptop open inside a Starbucks while you head to the toilet for a couple of minutes. First, we have user preferences. Local storage is often the go-to spot for websites to stash user preferences. It could be things like your language choice, theme selection, font size, or even your favorite cat meme style. Second, caching content. Ever wondered how websites load so quickly? Well, local storage plays a role there too. It's often used to store static content like images, CSS files, and JavaScript libraries. By caching these items in local storage, websites can fetch them from there instead of making a fresh request to the server each time. Third, form data. Local storage lends a helping hand when it comes to filling out forms. It's like a temporary holding area for your form data. If you navigate away from a page and return later, local storage makes sure your inputted data is still there, ready to save you from the frustration of starting from scratch. Fourth, user activity state. Local storage also has a knack for remembering where you left off. In multi-step processes or activities, it can store your progress on the current step. So even if you accidentally close the browser or take a break, local storage has your back to help you pick up where you left off. Fifth, client-side caching. Besides caching content, local storage can also store API responses or data fetched from the server. This caching feature boosts performance by reducing the need for repeated server requests, making your browser experience snappier. Just remember, while local storage is handy for storing data, it's important to be cautious about what's stored there. Sensitive information like passwords or personal data should be kept far away from local storage to maintain your privacy and security. So now that you're officially a highly decorated local storage expert, it's time to jump right into the code and play around with local storage. Let's learn how to work with local storage. I have a small sample project here. We will first look at how local storage works, how we can interact with it, and then we will look at a real-life application where we use local storage to save some data and display it on another page. So I have a small example website set up that has a wishlist and a homepage, and we will use that to display our items that we have added on the wishlist later right here. First, let's start with strings. Let's say I have a variable called theme, and in here I want to save the kind of theme that the user has selected. And right now, let's say he has seen the light theme. And inside of our local storage, we want to use a method called setItem. And with this local storage object here, we can interact with the local storage in the browser. And this method right here, setItem, lets us define a name, a key. We call it theme selection, and then a value that this theme selection has. So that's theme right here. So in my project, I open the console, and in the console you can see that our script is running because we have console.log local storage at the top. So when you go under application and local storage, you can see the kind of items that are saved in your local storage. So right here we have the key, theme selection, and then the value light theme that we have defined in our JavaScript. Now how can we use that information stored in local storage again in our code? Let's say we have a variable called const local storage theme equals, and then we use again a local storage object, and this time we use a method called getItem, and now all we need is to specify the key that we have used to save our data. So in this case, theme selection. I will close this sidebar so there's more space to read it, and now we can console.log our local storage theme. Back in our browser in the console, we can now see that light theme is now logged to the console. Now most often when you use local storage, you use it to save more complex items. So in our case right now, we have a variable called myItems, which holds some e-commerce information, such as the event that we had at the wishlist, an e-commerce object that has information on the currency, the total value, and a coupon applied. And then we have an array with all of the different items. So each item is an object with item name and item price. Now we want to save this to local storage. And the way that we do this is, again, we use the local storage object. We use the setItem method. And this time we call it myItems, and we want to set it to our items object. So let's see what happens if we just add myItems the way that they are right now. Back in our browser, I can see that we have this key myItems right here, but we don't have the value of the object. We just have a string that tells us that this item has the form of an object. So in order to save this information correctly, we first need to convert it into a string. And for that we have the JSON object, which has a method called stringify. And whatever object we put in here will be printed as a string. So now that I go to myItems, you can now see that we have the whole JSON string right here, and the browser even shows me the final object already. So I can see the different levels and the information each level holds. So let's say we now want to use this data again in our application. So we save it in a variable called myWishlist items, and we set it to local storage.getItems. It's the same method than we had before, and we use the myItems key. So what happens now when we console.log myWishlist items? You can now see that it has printed this JSON string right here, but as you can see, it's not an object, it's just a string. So if, for instance, I want to now get a specific property, such as the event name, it won't work. It says undefined because it's just a string and not an object. So again, what we need to do is we need to convert this back into an object. And again, we use the JSON object and we use a method called parse. So now it parses the string into an object. And now I can see the event is add to wishlist, because now I can access all of the different properties of this object. So how can you remove an item from local storage? Because as you learned earlier, there's no expiration date and the information will stay unless you delete it or the browser gets cleared. So again, we use the local storage object, and now we use a method called remove item. And again, all we have to do is now pass in the item name, in this case, myItems. Now back to our application, you can see that we only have the theme selection left and my items is gone. And last but not least, maybe you want to clear the whole local storage. So in that case, all you have to do is you say local storage.clear, and you don't need to specify any parameters in here because it clears the entire local storage. As you can see, there are no items left anymore. So these are the 4 most important methods to interact with your local storage. And now let's look at the real world example where we will use this items data right here to display it on the screen and remove it from local storage. So right here on the side we can go to our wish list, and inside of the wish list we want to display the items that are temporarily saved inside of our local storage. And when we click this button, clear my saved items, we want to remove the items from the local storage and from the DOM. The way that we do that is we first want to look for the page where we want to display the local storage data. So we say if document.location.pathname, which is wishlist in our case, we want to check whether we have wishlist in there. And we use the index of method because we can then see if wishlist is part of this path name. Because if it's there, the index of that is larger than 0. If we're not on a wishlist page, then the index is -0. Then we can console.log a wishlist page. Let's see if this works. So right now we have wishlist inside of our path name. If I go back to the home page, we have index in here and the condition is not true, so we don't see the message in the console. So once we are on the wishlist page, we want to display the items that we have in our local storage. So we will call a function called add items, and we will define that in a second. And we also want to remove the items. So we will get a reference to the button, which is our clear button, where we will clear this data from the local storage. And we get it by saying document.querySelector. And then we have to specify the class name, which in our case is .clearBTN. And then to our clear button, we want to add an event listener. And we want to listen to a click event. This is annoying. Yes, to a click event. And here we want to run a callback function. So anytime we want to click this button, we want to remove the item called my items from local storage, and we want to call our add items function again, because in here we will update the DOM. So if we have items, we add them to the DOM. If there are no items, the DOM is empty. Now let's define our function add items. And first of all, we want a reference to the element where we want to output our items. So we say var output equals document.querySelector. And if we look at the code, inside of our wishlist HTML, we have this div with the class of show products, and that's what we want to use. So we say .show products, and now we have a reference to that HTML element. Second, we want to get our items. So we will call it ls items, is the local storage items, and we want to get them by saying .localstorage.getItem, and we want to use the myItems key. And as we've learned before, this will just return a string, so we need to first parse it into a JavaScript object. Now first, we want to see if our items are present. So if there are no items, then we don't want to output anything. So let's start with that condition first. If there are no items, then we want to set output.innerHTML to a string that says no items here, or whatever you want to call it. If there are items, then we want to loop through this items array. And we say var items equals ls items, and it's inside of the e-commerce property, inside of the items property. Now we want to loop through it, so we say var I equals 0, I should be smaller than items.length. That's the condition for our loop. And with every iteration we want to add 1. And what we want to do with each iteration is that inside of our output we want to display the HTML, and we want to append additional HTML for every item that we have in here. So we want to say plus equals, and inside of a template string we can then define what we want to show. So for each item we first want to show a div with a class name of item, and inside of this div we then want to have a heading 3 where we get a reference to the current item. So we say items with the current index dot item name. That's how it's called. And then below that we have a paragraph where we output the current item. So we reference the items array and we get the current index item, and then we show the item price. And behind it we also want to output whatever currency we have. So we had that saved in the ls items dot ecommerce dot currency. Close this paragraph tag and save it. And you see we don't see anything yet. It says no items here because we first need to save the items to our local storage. We haven't done that yet. So just as we did earlier, here below our items we say local storage.set item, and then we set my items to json.stringify, and then we pass in our my items object. So now you can see inside of our local storage we have the my items object. It has the JSON string, and we get this object and display it inside of our browsers. So for each item we have the item name and the item price inside of its own div. And now if I call this function clear my saved items, it removes the items from the local storage and it says no items here. That's inside of the else statement of our if condition. So now you learned about what local storage is, what the use cases are, and how you can use it in your next web development project. If you did like this video, please leave a like and a comment down below, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future. Thanks for watching, see you next time.